The rusty creak of the shed door echoed in the cold night, breaking the silence of the countryside. The smell of mold, dust, and old wood invaded the nostrils of Antonio, the caretaker, who had been awakened by muffled moans. He pushed open the heavy door, and the single light bulb high up on the ceiling, dim and flickering, revealed a scene that made his blood run cold. Huddled among piles of dusty boxes, on an old burlap sack, was a boy. His eyes were wide open, staring into space, his body swaying gently back and forth in a hypnotic rhythm, a repetition that Antonio had never seen before. The cold of the night did not seem to affect him, but his face was pale, dirty, and he was trembling, not from the cold, but from a fear that Antonio could not decipher. The caretaker felt a lump in his throat, a terrible premonition. That child shouldn't be there. How could this be? A boy, alone, in an abandoned shed? In the village, the story of Pedro, a 7-year-old boy with autism, was, whispered in corners, a mixture of pity and prejudice. Pedro's mother, Helena, was at her limit. She vented to her closest neighbor, Dona Fatima, while they prepared tea, her hands shaking so much that she almost spilled the water. "Dona Fatima, I don't know what to do anymore. Pedro, he's gone again. It's the 3rd time this month. I look everywhere and can't find him. My heart is in pieces. It feels like it's going to come out of my mouth. I love him so much, Dona Fatima, but I feel like I'm failing him miserably. He isolates himself, hides, and I can't reach him. The crises are getting stronger, and the people in the village look at me as if he were a problem, a curse. His father, Carlos, abandoned us as soon as he was diagnosed. He said he didn't want a defective son, that this wasn't the life he had dreamed of. He ran away. And my family? My mother says it's divine punishment, that I must have done something very wrong. My father simply doesn't talk about it, as if Pedro doesn't exist. I feel completely alone in this battle. I've tried everything, Mrs. Fatima. Expensive therapists, doctors who promised miracles, but they just took my money and my hope. Pedro is only getting worse. He doesn't communicate properly, and I feel like he's getting more and more lost in his own world. People here in the village avoid me. They think he's dangerous, that he's under a spell. The boys on the street throw rocks at him when he walks by and call him crazy. I try to protect him, but I'm just one person. I just want a place where he'll be accepted, loved for who he is. A safe place. I'm drowning, Dona Fatima, completely drowning in this anguish. And Pedro, my little Pedro, is drowning with me in a sea of judgment and fear. The tears, previously contained, flowed freely down Helena's face, a pain that seemed endless, while Dona Fatima hugged her, feeling the weight of that sadness. Helena's anguish for Pedro led her down tortuous paths, where the line between hope and illusion blurred. The first light came with the visit of a healer from the neighboring town, Dona Zulmira, famous for her miraculous cures. "Your son has a very strong evil eye, my daughter. That's why he isolates himself and doesn't speak. He needs spiritual cleansing," Dona Zulmira declared with a mystical look. Helena, desperate for any solution, spent what little money she had on herbal baths, fumigations, and amulets, which only made Pedro more agitated and confused, due to the strong smells and unexpected touches. He hid even more, and the crises intensified, proving that spiritual healing was just cruel exploitation. The second salvation came from a doctor in the capital, Dr. Alberto, who promised the total integration of autistic children with an expensive experimental therapy involving hyperbaric chambers and high-cost vitamin injections. Carlos, Pedro's father, who had abandoned the family, reappeared briefly, seduced by the promise of having a normal son back. "This is our chance, Helena. I'll help with the costs, but he has to get back to normal," he demanded, in a tone that mixed hope and imposition. Pedro was subjected to exhausting sessions in the chamber. The noise of the compressor terrified him, and the injections made him cry in pain. Not only did he not integrate, but he regressed even further, losing the few advances he had made in communication. Carlos, seeing the failure, disappeared again, taking with him the rest of the hope and the little money he had promised. The greatest betrayal, however, came from the village itself. With Pedro's frequent disappearances, the neighbors began to spread rumors, some of them malicious. Father Francisco, a respected figure in the community, advised Helena to commit Pedro. "My daughter, this child needs a place where he can be truly cared for. It's too much of a burden for you, for his sake and for yours." The priest's words, though spoken with a tone of compassion, were a direct blow to Helena's heart. The community, once lukewarm in its indifference, now seemed to conspire against her, suggesting that she abandon her son. With every attempt at help, with every false hope, Helena and Pedro's pain only increased, sinking them further into a cycle of despair and misunderstanding. Pushing Pedro into isolation in places like the shed, Helena's life in the village was a stage for silent accusations and explicit judgments. The neighbors' stares, the doors that closed when she passed by with Pedro, the whispers of, "Poor Helena, her boy is possessed," it all hit her like stones. Donna Custodia, the village gossip, was the cruelest voice. "That boy is a problem. He's always out on the street scaring the other children. He should be tied up," she would shout at the market, making Helena cringe with shame and rage. Carlos, Pedro's father, was a ghost who only reappeared to haunt them. He would call from time to time, not to ask about Pedro, but to demand the little money he had invested in failed therapies. "You owe me, Helena. And the boy? Is he normal yet? Or am I going to have to come over there and take care of this myself?" he would threaten, his voice laden with contempt, as if Pedro's autism were Helena's personal fault. Carlos's abandonment was an open wound, a burden she carried alone. Helena's family was a minefield. Her mother, Donna Lucia, with an air of martyrdom, kept saying, "Daughter, I warned you. I always said this marriage wouldn't work. Now you see the result. That boy is punishment for your sins." Her father, Mr. Augusto, just shook his head and changed the subject, as if Pedro didn't exist. They refused to accept the diagnosis, to understand Pedro's needs. To them, he was just the grandson who brought shame to the family. Family gatherings were torture for Anna. The loud laughter, the strong smells of food, the crowd of people, it all overwhelmed Pedro, who began to rock back and forth and make repetitive sounds. It was at these gatherings that the humiliation became public. "Look at Pedro, what a disgrace," someone would always say, followed by muffled giggles. The last straw came when Pedro, during one of his escapes, entered the neighbor's barn and accidentally knocked over some tools. The neighbor, angry, came to Helena's house and in front of everyone threatened to call the police. "Either you control this child, or he'll end up in jail. He's a danger." Helena felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. The shame, anger, despair, and loneliness were overwhelming. It was in this moment of total helplessness that Pedro, in his usual escape from chaos, found refuge in the old shed on the neighboring farm, belonging to Mr. Antonio, the caretaker, a man of few words but with a curious and observant gaze. The scene of Pedro cowering between boxes, looking for a corner to hide from the world, was a portrait of his struggle. Helena's revenge would not be against those who judged her, but proof that her son with the right care would be more than a disgrace. He would be a valuable soul. The tremor in Antonio's hands, the caretaker, was uncontrollable. The sight of the boy crouched among the boxes in the shed, his eyes fixed and swaying rhythmically, struck him deep in his soul. He, Antonio, a man of few words and much loneliness, accustomed to the company of only animals and the land, felt a sharp pain at the sight of such vulnerability. Carefully, without making a sound, he approached. It was then that he noticed something, a crumpled piece of paper, half hidden under the boy's arm. He picked it up. It was a note. The childish, shaky handwriting read, "Please don't hurt me. I just want to be somewhere quiet. My name is Pedro. I'm not bad." And on the back of the note was a drawing, a little boy holding hands with a big airplane, floating in the blue sky. Antonio felt tears streaming down his wrinkled face, a cry he hadn't shed in years. The words on the note, the image of the boy swinging in search of peace, the pain in his eyes. It all took him back to his own story, to a past he kept locked away. His younger brother, who had died in childhood, was just like Pedro. He had the same swings, the same distant look, the same difficulty in communicating. Antonio saw in Pedro a chance to redeem an old pain, to take care of someone who needed shelter and whom he, in his youth, had not known how to protect. Antonio was not a man of words, but of feelings and actions. He did not wake Pedro. Instead, he took an old but clean blanket and gently covered him. He sat there in the partial darkness of the shed, watching the boy sleep, like a silent guardian. At dawn, he went to Helena's house. He knocked on the door and, without saying a word, just handed her the crumpled note. Helena, her face marked by a night of searching and despair, took the note and read it. Tears flowed freely, but this time they were tears of relief. Antonio pointed to the shed. From that day on, Antonio, the man of few words, became Pedro's safe haven. He didn't try to cure his autism. He understood him. He noticed that the sound of rain on the shed roof calmed Pedro, that the texture of the old wood fascinated him, that the smell of wet earth reassured him. Antonio began taking Pedro on short walks around the farm, teaching him about the plants and animals, always in silence, letting the boy explore at his own pace. When Pedro rocked back and forth, Antonio didn't scold him. Sometimes he even joined him in a gentle swing, creating a connection, a wordless understanding. Helena's revenge would not come with screams, but with proof that her son, treated with love and understanding, was not a disgrace, but a brilliant soul finally found. The discovery of Pedro in the shed and the note in his hands marked the beginning of a silent and profound turnaround. The first and most exciting victory was a glance. Pedro, who had previously avoided eye contact almost entirely, now, in moments of calm with Antonio, fixed his brown eyes on the caretaker's. It was a look of trust, of recognition, a sparkle that he was present, attentive, something Helena had longed for so long. Then came a different sound. Pedro was still repeating himself, but now there was something new. One day, while Antonio was fixing a fence and the rhythmic sound of the hammer echoed, Pedro, rocking back and forth, made a clear sound. Tum, tum. It was an imitation of the hammer, an attempt at interaction, at participating in the world. Antonio, without making a fuss, repeated the sound, and Pedro smiled, a genuine smile that made Helena's heart flutter. The biggest step, however, came with a gesture of affection. Pedro, who had previously shied away from any touch, one day, while Antonio was showing him a colorful butterfly resting on a flower, reached out his little hand and gently touched the caretaker's wrinkled face. It was a simple gesture of affection, an act of trust and affection that said more than 1,000 words. Antonio moved, simply held Pedro's small hand, and brought it to his heart. Pedro's crises did not disappear completely, but their intensity and frequency decreased dramatically. When sensory overload occurred, he did not run desperately. He looked for the shed, his new safe haven, or sought out Antonio, who calmed him with his quiet presence and the rhythm of his own silent rocking. Antonio taught Helena to observe Pedro's signs, to understand that repetition was a form of regulation, that rocking was a comfort mechanism. He taught her to create a more welcoming environment at home, with soft sounds and softer lighting. Pedro's small victories were, in fact, giant steps for the whole family. The boy's silence began to be filled with new forms of communication, and the shed, once a place of abandonment, became Pedro's sanctuary, where he felt loved, understood, and above all, accepted in his entirety. Pedro's transformation at Antonio's hands was a mirror that forced Helena to confront her own truths and recognize the mistakes she had made in her desperate search. She realized that in her eagerness for a cure and social acceptance, she had lost sight of her son's true essence. The guilt that had been eating away at her diminished, replaced by a painful but necessary realization. She had allowed the judgment of others and her ex-husband's denial to dictate Pedro's worth. Antonio, the quiet caretaker, became Helena's greatest mentor. He didn't use technical terms, he just taught her to observe, to listen to Pedro's nonverbal cues, to respect his limits, and to find beauty in his uniqueness. Marcos, the distant father, was forced to confront reality. The village stories about Pedro, the malicious rumors, lost their power in the light that the boy radiated alongside Antonio. Father Francisco, Dona Custodia, Carlos, and Helena's family, who once mocked him or considered him a disgrace, gradually became nothing more than distant echoes. Helena understood that accepting Pedro was not giving up, but rather freeing herself from the relentless search for a non-existent cure, freeing herself from the suffocating weight of others' judgment, freeing herself from the guilt that consumed her. Pedro didn't need to be fixed. He needed to be loved and understood in his uniqueness, in his neurodiversity. The pain of the journey was still there, but now it was accompanied by a deep gratitude. The cruel laughter of his mother, which once hurt him so deeply, was silenced by the peace found in unconditional love. Pedro, the boy who was called Shame, became the greatest teacher in the family, teaching everyone that beauty lies in difference, and that true love does not try to prune but nurtures, respects, and allows one to flourish in their own essence. Helena and Antonio's revenge was living proof that empathy can heal wounds that science and society cannot reach. Life on the farm with Antonio by her side did not magically turn into a fairy tale without problems. The challenges inherent in Pedro's autism persisted, and the journey was still long, full of new obstacles and lessons, but the family that formed there between Helena, Pedro, and Antonio had found something much more valuable than a cure. They had discovered the brutal truth of reality and the unshakable strength of their own union. Antonio, the caretaker who lived on the margins of society, became the pillar of hope, the guide who taught Helena to see her son's soul. Helena, with her heart finally at peace and a new purpose in life, saw in each of Pedro's small achievements, in each understanding glance, in each babble, living proof that true love and patience were the greatest superpowers that could exist, capable of moving mountains and transforming lives. The shed, once a place of abandonment and mystery, became a sanctuary, a space for learning, inclusion, and acceptance, not only for Pedro, but for all who were touched by his journey and witnessed his incredible transformation. Dona Custodia, Carlos, Father Francisco, and Helena's family, who once mocked, abandoned, or considered him shameful, were gradually silenced, not by confrontation but by the light that Pedro radiated, by his calm and serene presence. Helena's revenge was not retaliation, but irrefutable proof that prejudice and ignorance can be disarmed and even crushed by the unwavering dignity and unconditional love of a family that refuses to give up. Pedro, the boy who was found alone in a shed, taught everyone that communication transcends spoken words, that true intelligence lies in the ability to listen with the heart, and that inclusion is not a favor granted but a fundamental and universal right. They understood that life with autism is a continuous journey, an adventure of daily discoveries and miracles, not a final destination or a sentence, and that each day is a new opportunity to love, accept, and thrive together. Not every cry for help comes in words. Sometimes it is in a boy's silence, in the sway of his body, in the search for a quiet place. And the greatest act of love is not healing, but the discovery that value lies in acceptance and welcoming a soul in its purest form. Because true love does not judge who we are, it only sees the sparkle that is in each of us. If the story of Pedro and his journey touched your heart, if you felt the pain of abandonment and the joy of acceptance, then this message is for you. Don't let this powerful story end here in your mind. Leave your comment and share your thoughts. What did this story awaken in you? What lesson do you take away for your life? Share this story with someone who needs to hear this truth, this message of hope and courage, today. And if you want to continue to be inspired by stories that transform and remind us of the power of acceptance, sign up and join us in building a world where every life with its nuances and particularities is seen, valued, celebrated, and above all, understood. Your voice, your engagement, your empathy can change the world around us, one heart at a time. Let's sow acceptance and reap love together.